Do you want to know what the SRA and Kaplan are looking for when it comes to an SQE2 legal drafting question? If so, you're in the right place. Stay tuned after the jingle.
If you wanna be solicitors, why don't you come and visit us at SQE TV?
As regulars of SQE TV will know by now, when it comes to the SQE2 assessments, you have 5 days worth of assessments. You have 16 mini assessments set across those 5 days. 3 days of which are for written skills, when you have 4 mini assessments on those days, and on the other 2 days they're set aside for oral skills when you have 2 oral skills assessments on each of those days. When it comes to the marking of those assessments, half of the mark is for demonstrating the relevant skill and the other half is for demonstrating your understanding, knowledge and application of the underlying law. Now in this video we're focusing on the skill of legal drafting, which is one of the written skills. So it's on one of the days where you have 4 assessments, and remember there are 3 of them. And depending on which day it is, it depends on what the subject matter will be of your written skills assessment. So on one day, you'll be dealing with dispute resolution and criminal litigation. On another day, you'll be dealing with property practice or wills, intestacy, probate administration and practice. And on the third day, you'll be dealing with business organisations, rules and procedures. And you'll have a legal drafting question on each of those days.
SQE TV.
Just before we look at the sample question from the SRA's website, just to remind you, the legal drafting question, which is one of the written skills, is computer based. You will have 45 minutes to answer the question. That includes reading time for the papers that are presented to you at the beginning of the mini assessment. And you'll be asked to draft either in full, a whole document, or possibly part of a legal document. Could be either. You'll be given some instructions, some paperwork to look at, and it seems to be that 3 pages worth of instructions plus maybe documents, so a total of 3 pages to read. Maybe 1 page will be an email and 2 pages will be some documents or some additional information for you to make sense of before you actually do your drafting. You'll either be drafting from a precedent document or a template, or have to amend something that's maybe drafted already, or maybe drafting without anything to go on at all. So it could be completely free drafting without a template to rely upon. So it just depends on the nature of the document, I think, that the SRI are asking you to draft as part of the assessment, as to whether you get a template or whether you get a contract or something to mark up or amend or to do something from scratch. Who knows? The main skills, just to remind you, and we covered this in previous videos, so I won't go on to it for too long. You need to demonstrate clear, precise, concise and acceptable language. You need to have a logical and appropriate structure to your drafting. And when it comes to applying the law, you need to make sure that you're legally correct in what you're saying. You're legally comprehensive to make sure you're covering everything that's necessary from your instructions, but also everything that's necessary in a document of the type that you are drafting. And as you're doing that, the SRA say you need to identify ethical and professional conduct issues that exercise judgment where necessary to resolve any of those particular issues with honesty and integrity.
SQE TV.
Now, the SRA have provided a sample question on legal drafting in the context of a dispute resolution matter. Remember, on the SQE2 day, when you're being assessed on dispute resolution, you're also being assessed on criminal litigation. So you could be asked to do something on criminal litigation from a drafting perspective in the alternative. But this particular example is asking candidates to prepare a particular claim on behalf of a claimant in relation to a breach of contract claim that's been brought in the county court. And interestingly, you can see from the documents, if you click the link, that you're given a 1-pager of instructions from your supervising partner, giving you the background of the nature of the dispute, the claim, but it also attaches a 2-page draft initial statement from your client's managing director to give you all the information you need to go ahead and prepare the particulars of claim. Now, in terms of what they provided you to start off your drafting, not a lot, but they've given you something. They've given you the top and the tail of a particular claim, but the meat and drink that goes in the middle is something that obviously you need to draft from scratch. So a little bit of help, but not a lot. And finally, Helpfully, the interest and the daily rate figures were given by the SRA for this particular question. That doesn't necessarily mean that you wouldn't have to work out the interest calculations and daily rate in other types of questions that the SRA might set. But in this one, they gave you that to save you time in the assessment.
SQE TV.
So how does the student go from this, the template provided by Kaplan and the SRA, to this, the sample answer that a candidate is expected to come up with in order to pass the assessment? Remember, this is just a sample answer. It's not a perfect answer by any means, but it certainly is comfortably competent as far as Kaplan and the SRA are concerned. Now, the first thing to note is, of course, you need to fill in the blanks at the top of the template to make sure the relevant parties and the other details are inserted. But, of course, the main marks come from starting the main drafting after the heading particulars of claim. Just before we look at the first paragraph, just one thing about the general formatting of legal drafting documents generally for the SQE2 assessments is this, that candidates will not be marked down on formatting errors like an extra space between words or an extra space or no space between paragraphs. That sort of thing will not be penalised. But for a document like a particular claim, you would be expected to have numbered paragraphs that are consecutively numbered. And if you fail to do that, you're very likely to be marked down by the SRA, because that's what the expectation is when you're drafting a document of that kind. Indeed, lots of types of drafting do require numbered paragraphs, not all, but it's often something that would be required.
SQE TV.
So let's have a look at paragraph 1. Paragraph 1 deals with the all material times clause, as I call it, that goes in normally the first paragraph of a particular claim, just to explain who the claimant is in relation to this particular type of claim. And you can see that at all material times, the claimant was a building company engaged in the provision of building services in North London. Nicely, succinctly put there, I think. And at all material times, they acted through the managing director, John Evans. That gives you some context and the court some context as to just the background to the claim, which is then set out in more detail in terms of the nature of the relationship between the parties upon which this dispute is founded. So paragraph 2 deals with the contract itself, when it was taken out, what the price of the contract was, and the nature of the contract in relation to the refurbishment that's mentioned. And then what's mentioned in paragraph 3, and I think this is really helpful, is to set out what was promised in terms of the payment structure. And it sets out the dates on which various payments were due to be made, and that in paragraph 4 an initial payment has been made, because where you're claiming a specific amount, you need to be clear of what the total contract amount was, what amount has been paid to date and later, so that you can do a calculation as to what is due overall. It makes sense and logical sense as to how you got to your final figure. Then when we look at paragraph number 5, it mentions that the claimant began the work in 26th of September 2022, and later on you'll see that number 7, paragraph 7, it says the work was completed on the 7th of July, and it was done to the satisfaction of the defendant, and an invoice was delivered to the defendant for the balance due. So what the claimant is seeking to do there is to make it clear that everything that was expected of the claimant has been done. What you got in paragraph 6 is a variation of the terms of the contract, and that's really important because where a schedule of payments was originally due but varied, where sums of money are now due and owing, we have to show that the contract was varied but they are still due and owing. And then we've got the breach. The breach is set out in paragraph number 8. To make it clear that despite the fact that we performed everything we should have done as the claimants, the defendant have reneged on their part of the bill. They've basically not paid the balance due other than that initial payment. And paragraph 10 is the clause that deals with the drafting of the claim for interest. Now, you were given the relevant figures for the total amount of interest to date plus the daily rate. Remember, in another assessment, you might actually have to do the calculation, but in this one, you've actually been given the relevant figures. But you do need to know how to plead that and draft that. So make sure you're familiar with the drafting of interest claims in particulars of claim. And then what follows at the end is often missed by candidates in an assessment like this. It's what we call the prayer. And you might think, well, it's not necessary because we've already said the claimant claims the sum of £156,000. We've already claimed the interest. Why do we have to say it again? Well, it's a convention that you have to adopt in a particular claim. And if you don't include it, you'll be marked down. And then you've got the statement of truth, which obviously was there from the template that you had given at the beginning of the assessment. And don't forget where you have documents that you're going to be attaching, or where you have schedules, which you might do in particular as a claim. In this case, we're attaching the contract. Make sure that you do include reference to the schedule so that there's consistency in your cross-referencing. If you just refer to the schedule in the main body of the particular claim and then didn't refer to the schedule at the end, it would indicate to the examiners that you've omitted and forgotten about that. So make sure that you are consistent. So what you got is a really logically presented, well-structured particular claim that generally presents things in chronological order, but in a way that sets out basically who the parties are, what the contract was, what the expectations were in terms of performance, who had to do what, and then what the breach is, and then effectively what the claimant claims, the balance due plus the interest. Don't forget the prayer, and don't forget to include a schedule at the end.
SQE TV.
Just before we leave the sample question and the sample answer, 2 things to make sure you don't forget when it comes to this type of assessment if you get a particular claim, and that is make sure you use the instructions to complete the heading and also the statement of truth. Very often in a template, people just assume the type parts are right, and then the bit in the middle, which is where the meat and drink is, that's where you've got to focus. Don't forget there are easy marks for filling in the blanks at the top and the tail of the document as part of the template. So there we are. Hope you enjoyed this particular presentation on how to prepare for a particular claim question for a legal drafting assessment that forms part of SQE2. Gives you an example of how legal drafting might be assessed in that context, but there are of course many different types of documents across the multiple practice areas you could be assessed on. Do make sure that you do a full SQE2 preparation course to make sure you're fully prepared for those types of documents you could be assessed on. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. We love it when you do, because when you do, you get access to all of our videos as soon as they drop. And as we always do, when we finish an SQE TV video, we say, it's now time for the jingle.
If you wanna be solicitors, why don't you come and visit us at SQE TV? SQE